as the Global Leaf Operations Manager, as well as in Ethiopia, where he was the leader for the leaf organization during the JTI acquisition of the government tobacco monopoly. That's not enough. He also is a member of the following boards. He's the chairman of the Tobacco Processors Association. He sits on JTI Leaf Malawi as a board member. He is also a board member and incoming president of the LILONGWE Rotary Club, popularly known as Lingadzi. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for one Limbani Kakome. A big hand, please. We are going to have presentation from Limbani. As such, guest of honor, Honorable Minister and all the high table would ask you to come this side so that we turn around and face this direction, please. Help us to change the setup up front.
Thank you very much. It's such a great pleasure and honor to be invited here. I was surprised when I was told that I'm guest speaker, because I believe I'm part and parcel of the grower body in Malawi. So I'm not guest, but just another tobacco person. Honorable Minister, thank you for gracing this occasion. And I'd also like to thank our colleagues from the ITJ for coming all the way to join us, tobacco people in Malawi, and also all members of Tama and all delegates that are at this function today. When I was asked to present on this topic, I should say, not often do I feel daunted at the task to speak on an issue. I found the topic quite very interesting, but also quite divergent in its nature. But at the same time, the more I looked into it, I found the confluence of the issues that need to be dealt with and how strategic they are to our country and our progression of the tobacco industry. The choice of the picture speaks to what I'm going to speak today, Nzoteka. When you think of compliance, of growing a crop that is compliant, in the face of rising regulatory issues and the impact we have as an industry on the environment and how the environment also impacts us, you find that in the picture it integrates tobacco growing, management of the environment through forestry, and the hope the lady signifies that it's possible to integrate a growing of tobacco in a compliant way, at the same time being ready to mitigate our impact against climate change, but at the same time being ready to counter the effects of climate change. My understanding of the brief that I was given is that by the end of this session, this presentation, we should be able to have a shared understanding of the underpinnings of what a compliant crop is and the confluence of climate change vis-a-vis tobacco production, marketing, and being a global player in that landscape. Striving to be ahead of the game in a rapidly changing environment is a hallmark of a surviving and growing industry that we are supposed to represent, being the lead economic driver of the economy in Malawi. The question is, what is a compliant crop? It can take so many forms, and the issue is very wide. But I'll focus it a little bit closer to the topic of discussion today when it comes to climate change and striving to be compliant as a tobacco producer. Just to give an example of how JTI is spread globally, you see we are almost in all continents as an example of our global sourcing footprint. We do source tobacco from over 34 countries and working with over 28 suppliers. The impact of this global footprint can be huge. And ultimately, when we talk of compliance, we should have in mind that our tobacco that we produce ends up as a product that a consumer smokes. It's a food product. It's regulated like a food product. And as basic as it looks when we grow tobacco in the fields from the nursery all the way to the auction floors and is taken by the buyers to the factories for processing and put into boxes, it ultimately ends into products that are consumed. I just picked jealously products that JTI produces, but other tobacco companies do produce other cigarettes that you know of. It's the consumer, the choice that the consumer makes to decide whether to smoke a Camel or a Winston, that then sets the standards for compliance. Because consumers these days globally are not only looking at what we call product intrinsics, the feel and taste of a product, but they're looking at to say, how was this product made? Was it made in an environmental friendly manner? Did it use forced labor? Did it use child labor? Is it impacting the environment in a negative way? Consumers are starting to ask that. And sometimes they pick their phone and scan a product. And most companies are now producing products that can tell the story of how that product was made. Now, the consumer decision is very key. I've told this story many times before of our groundnuts, that we developed groundnuts that were known globally. But when the consumer decision was made to say, if your groundnut has aflatoxins, I'm not going to consume them, we lost that strong position. That's how impactful a decision of a buyer like you and me can decide whether to be in a Gabaza or to decide to be in a minibus or drive our own car. That safety consideration, that wallet decision you make determines compliance. Because when the consumer starts to demand to say, I want a product that is not cutting down trees, it sounds very remote to us, but it will start impacting how many cigarettes you can sell to those consumers. If they have in their mind that these products are impacting the environment, say for the example of cutting trees. Sometimes when you talk about compliance, we make it sound like, oh, it's okay, this guy's sitting in offices and the like. But I just want us to take some time and understand other people what have said about compliance. And compliance tends to relate to what they call traceability. Being able to follow your product from where it was a seed all the way to how it has been produced to the shelf and into your hands as a consumer. And that is called traceability. Being able to follow the production of a crop, of a product through a supply chain. And traceability is a tool for meeting consumer demands. That's a very key point. It's not about trying to be good, it's not about trying to look that we are doing the right things, etc. It's the whole idea of being able to meet a consumer need. I have heard people talk about, more especially a product, as highly controversial as tobacco. The consumer is starting to say, I would like to trace where this tobacco came from. And this is a company called Agrivi. They have talked about traceability. And if we take time and understand what they're talking about is that consumers are demanding to see that line of visibility all the way from the seed to where that product ends up on the shelf and into their hands. What kind of seed was used? What kind of chemicals were used? What kind of curing processes were used? What kind of labor was involved in the production of this product? They are becoming socially conscious, environmentally conscious. And that decision determines whether that product can sell or will not sell. But then what happens is that politicians, like our fellow minister here, they respond to our needs. Governments respond to the people that they're trying to save. When the consumers start to say, I want to see products that are environmentally friendly, that are not using child labor, government starts to regulate that space. And you see that consumer needs starts to translate to regulation. We've seen it recently, and I'll use a typical example. When we saw a lot of road accidents, we're starting to move to say, let's regulate the speed of public transport. Let's put speed limits on these buses. Let's monitor between stage A and stage B. If it moves from Ncheu to Dedze, it should take 1 hour. And if it does less than 1 hour, then there is a problem. So governments start to respond, policies start to respond to what consumers need. And what happens is that the consumer demands move from a voluntary space to a mandatory regulatory space. And that's why it becomes very challenging for us if we are not ahead of the game in how we manage our tobacco supply chain. And I will give examples of how this has evolved over the years. So in 2011, the UN set out guiding principles on how businesses can do human rights. That was a watershed movement, because all of a sudden, the UN, with its might and power of influencing policy, put up guidelines that businesses should follow when it gets to human rights. And after that, you see a proliferation of legislations coming from different governments. But more importantly for us is at the end, and in the next slide, where we see the EU is starting to put regulations around deforestation-free products, and not only targeting tobacco, because sometimes we feel the victims that they're targeting us. It's a political issue. They're only looking at tobacco, but they're looking at almost every value chain, from mining to cattle to cocoa, coffee, oil, name it. They're starting to put regulations to say, how are you going to demonstrate that your products do not damage the forestry resources around you? There are EU regulations that are now starting to prohibit products that use forced labor and child labor. So what you see is that the conditions must be made of a product to meet specific requirements in the EU. Now, why is this very significant for Malawi? A majority of our tobacco, when we produce it, is shipped to Europe. And if these regulations come into place and are enforced, in some countries like Germany, they have already started enforcing them as of this year, we'll start to find that window of export starting to narrow. Mr. President spoke of, in his speech, spoke of what we saw when the USA put the withhold release order, where shipments started to be rejected at the border. Now, that was a small component. Banatisi knows how much we sent to Europe. He also knows how much we send to all parts of the world, and so does the Minister of Agriculture. This legislation in the EU, when it takes full effect, it will have significant impacts on the marketability and access to markets of our tobacco. Questions that we should be asking, that the legislation will be asking us in the bottom part of the slide, is that they will ask us, is it free of deforestation? Is it free of forced labor? And can you provide a due diligence statement? Now, due diligence statements, for those that have done them, are not things, it's not just a paper you fill, but you have to prove, you have to show proof that, yes, I have so many farmers, I have visited so many times, and I'll demonstrate a little bit more as we go into the presentation. So how do we deliver a compliant crop? After defining what the consumer needs for compliance are, because it's the consumer who demands what that we produce. If consumers don't demand it, then we will not produce it, because we'll have no one to sell it to. At the same time, then government starts to regulate consumer requirements. Then you ask yourself, say, how do I deliver this? It is actually quite a daunting and not an easy task, but it is doable. And we all can collectively, if we set our ducks in a row properly with the right legislation, the right processes, the right policy, and the right institutional frameworks amongst and ourselves as the tobacco industry, we can do that. I'm glad to say that as Malawi, for the tobacco industry, we are ahead of the game. But what we could do is to consolidate our moves in a unified manner as a lead industry, and lead by example, and take the charge to also help the other value chains, like the bananas, the legumes, and everything, to take the example of what we do in the tobacco industry, so that not only should we stand on one leg of exporting tobacco as our lead export, but we can also tag along these lagging value chains alongside tobacco and grow them and make Malawi even a bigger exporting country than it is currently now. We all have seen how we are struggling with the export base, because our export base is only relying on one major export, and we need to grow the other exports. But tobacco, so far we are ahead of it. What we need is to consolidate what we've been doing, and I'll demonstrate how we have been doing it as a company alongside the industry, and how then that can be leveraged to carry along the other value chains as well. First of all, we have a strategy. As a company, we do identify and prioritize our issues, and then we do set up response measures that are measurable, and then we communicate and report what we do, and that feeds back into every time. So this loop of learning all the time helps us to always do better the next time we do something. We make mistakes, we've lost money, we've sometimes bruised relationships, but every time it's a learning opportunity that you identify, prioritize, because you cannot do everything, and then you put a response measure. Today, in this presentation, I'm talking a lot more about one of the key pillars in our strategy was climate change. And that's where we saw the confluence with the theme of today. But also in there, you see that human rights come up and grower livelihoods do come up. Crop integrity is key element of compliance. You need to make sure that your crop has the right chemicals, has the right fertilizers, it's the right seed, and comes out with the right chemical properties. So all of this you see speaks to the theme of today, is that in there, those pillars, all of them do speak to what we need to do. Each one of them has a compliance element of it, and key to that, you see that climate change was a big strategy within JTI in terms of how we do manage that. We have a governance structure within the business. We have STP, which is a way of evaluating ourselves. We have targets in terms of our sustainability targets and how we do report on labor and our leaf supply agreements. But key is that JTI leaf supply agreement, because every time we work with a grower, we need to make sure that we have a contract with that grower. And that contract does explain how we expect them to produce a compliant crop that goes along also with climate change impact mitigation. Seem to have lost, okay. So you see, as far back as 2020, when we did our stakeholder analysis upon entry into the Malawi market in 2009, we did map out what are the key issues we should be mindful of. These were questions sent out to stakeholders in the market, and that's one way of identifying, to say when you enter into a place, you should scope your environment and understand what you're dealing with. And you see, that was the ranking of stakeholders telling us what are the important things in Malawi. Farmer returns was very key. The economics of the farmer will determine whether they're going to be compliant or not. We need to make sure that farmers are making the right margin, and all of us are to play. And I would like to shock you for today that price is not the only element in farmer margins, because most often that's what we talk about, pay farmers well. Yes, it's important, but it's not the only thing. One key thing in farmer returns to make sure that farmers do the right thing is to make sure that their economics are right. Key to that is also to understand, to say, what else do we take away from the farmer when they are paid? Are they yielding the right yields? Are they producing the right quality? But again, is the supply chain efficient enough that only those that are adding value to the transaction are in that value chain? It's a key element. Then you have the farmer demographics. Here in Malawi, we have a young population, and we need to make sure that as they grow, we are making them into more progressive farmers. It's very key. But let me speak more specific to the issues of today. You will see that CO2 emissions were part of our scoping of what are the issues to deal with. And you will see also that deforestation in the last three issues came up. And the key question has always come up to say, why does JTI not buy flu cured in Malawi? One of the issues was that we were not sure of the curing sustainability of the forestry resources in the country. And that's why we focused a lot more on barley. And we have put programs to deal with barley curing. Flu might come if we are confident of the curing resources in terms that they are sustainable. I know other companies have put robust programs that are dealing with that, and we should encourage them. But forestry is a very big issue for all of us, and we should make sure that we do deal with that. So, in 2019, we did again another scope to understand what are the issues. And you see climate change still comes up in the middle there. Livelihoods of growers in terms of what they are making, but also you see that the environment came up strong as one of the strategic issues we should focus on. Hence, that circle you saw at the beginning of what our strategy is informed. Because all these things feed into the strategy that we do implement when we're working to make sure we produce a compliant crop, but that also deals with issues of the environment, that also deals with the issues of climate change. Responding to the consumer needs that are always on the horizon when we want to sell products to them. A key strategic move we had asked for when coming into the country in 2009, when I was joining JTI in 2010, was to ask for contract farming, or IPS, Integrated Production System, because it gives you the line of sight. When I joined JTI, the Department of Agronomy was a department of 12 people to look after the production of tobacco across the country. It has grown to a team of 99 agronomy technicians, 12 agronomy supervisors, 3 area managers, and always developing a bench that we can pull from where need be when people are moving into retirements or leaving the company, of training 15 graduate trainees and making them shadow the agronomy technicians all the time. We do contract 8,700 growers, and we do not buy our tobacco from the auction floors because we do not have from the auction sales, because we do not have a line of visibility of how traceable that tobacco is. For these growers, we have a full traceability program that I will demonstrate in the coming slides. We do contract over 11,000 hectares nationwide. The average hectare size of a grower is around 1.3 to 1.8, with intents of growing that hectareage together along with complementary crops. Our loan portfolio is $16 million per year of farm inputs that we do provide to growers on very competitive interest rates that are much better than what the commercial banks, which resonates with what Bwana President was talking about, of having commercially sensitive loans for agriculture. If we are an agriculture economy, we should be sensitive to the fact that our financing should be directed in a way that recognizes the special nature of agriculture and how financing for that sector should be. A traceable supply chain through grower contracting helps us to have the line of visibility that I talked about, that we can prove to the consumer that we know how we produce this tobacco that has ended up into this cigarette. What you see there is a handheld device, it's a phone. In there is a tool that we use, we call it agromobility. We are able to record all the grower details, their locations, their names, number of people that are living on the farm, number of children on the farm, number of workers, hectareage, and we do map out. Where you see here is an agronomy technician preparing to do a visitation with a grower. We do spend roughly about $3 million a year in free extension service to deliver to growers. Extension services that we can then prove to our consumer that we are producing a traceable crop. Just to give examples of how that works is that all those dots you see across the face of Malawi are the growers that we have and where they are and where their fields are. We've mapped out their household, their chigafa, their munda, and everything. So a technician, when they visit, would know that they have visited such a grower, and this was a discussion that they had. They were talking about fertilizers, they were talking about nursery seeds, they were talking about child labor, and that is recorded into a system. If a consumer, a government would come and say, prove to me that you produce your tobacco and it's traceable, we have these systems that can show where our growers are and how often do we visit them. So upon completion of a visit, data is captured, the grower visitation by the AT is reported to agronomy management, analyses are done, the number of visits done per week are recorded, distances from market access in terms of where the chigafa is, where the munda is, where the household is, and if there are going to be challenges like side selling and maybe farmers losing their tobacco in the chigafas, we can advise them on how to work around those issues. But we also do make observations. If we find child labor, that's an urgent observation. It's flagged into the system, and I read the report immediately, and then we can initiate a response action to find out what was the cause of the issue and how it can be implemented. If it's a repeated issue, then we have a discussion with the grower in terms of the continuity of our contractual arrangement. The climate change confluence, talking now about traceability and how then the two interface in terms of manage if you don't know where your growers are. And I'm glad to see that Tama, you have that structure of where you have cascaded your grower representation all the way to the grassroots. It's a very important asset. If you could brand that, it would probably be much more valuable than maybe, let's say they say when you take a bottle of Coca-Cola, the content in the bottle is much cheaper than the label Coca-Cola outside. What you have is that. You have a brand where you have that cascaded presence. It's not just talking that we have members, but we have a representation that can be traced to the grassroots. It's a very key, important asset, and I would encourage, as Tama, in your strategic plans, to use that as a leverage, because you can only manage if you know where you're going, if you know where your people are. And that's where we will talk about the confluence of traceability and climate change. We are able to implement, mitigate against the impacts of climate change, but at the same time, also not contribute to the worsening nature of climate change by knowing where our growers are and then implementing programs that you see in the next few slides. The first key thing is that wherever we have growers in certain locations, we also subscribe to Climate Tempo. It's a Brazilian company that's very good at monitoring weather impacts and climate change. And they do give us periodic reports to the extent that we are able to give feedback to our growers on a real-time basis what they should expect in a coming season. This report, the latest that we have is up to June this year, and it's showing us in these few slides what we are anticipating this year is that it might likely be an El Nino year. Likely. Now, I'm not a prophet, so that's why I'm using the word likely. But that's what the scientists are saying, that when they've looked at sea surface temperatures, it's correlating to the conditions that breed an El Nino year. And what does an El Nino year mean? I would not want to volunteer to be an agronomist like I'm a good doctor here and Dr. Changaya, but we all know that the word El Nino was always characterized by maybe intermittent rains, irregular rains, below average rains sometimes to average rains, and some dry spells in between. So it's normally a difficult year. Now, when we get this data, we start passing it on to our growers to make sure that their agronomy practices are ready for that kind of rain. You see, we've been monitoring precipitation up to June and projecting into July. In the next, by the end of July, we'll get other projections. By the time growers are going into nurseries, we're starting to prepare them to look for the themes that are much deeper, to make sure their nurseries are not susceptible to dry weather if it's prolonged. And I'll show you also some programs that we do put in place to make sure that farmers are given the resilience to build around that. Key, next to crop, to rainfall monitoring and weather forecasting that we do religiously follow, is to ensure that our crop estimation process is robust. So it starts all the way from contracting, looking at historical performance of growers. How do they perform in good years? How do they perform in bad years? If you have that understanding, you will know how to stretch your growers. In a bad year, you will know how to limit their exposure, because you cannot give someone who can't handle risk, then you increase their hectarage. Then you're creating a problem for yourself and for the grower. You're putting that grower at risk and yourself. So you need to understand their historical performance and how do they perform in different times of weather impact. Then you do monitor your crop estimates from the seed bed all the way when they have baled it. You need to know at each stage, and timely and accurate crop estimation is very key, because if there's a weather impact, you can have a discussion with that grower. How do we handle your lawn? How do we handle your crop if there's a situation in your area? Last year when the weather was so bad, we went with a very key message to growers: every leaf counts. Because most times growers, sometimes they don't take care of those leaves at the bottom because they have plenty. But in a bad year, every leaf counted. So it's also that anticipation that helps you to pass on the correct messages to growers when you see an impact of climate coming. Using the same agromobility, we have subscribed to a high-resolution satellite imagery that also helps us in some countries, not yet in Malawi, but in some countries, to monitor forestation, especially where we buy flu-cured, where our exposure to climate change in terms of deforestation is bigger. So we do get high-resolution satellite images that do pass through to monitor the trees that have been planted and to monitor their survival rate and also to calculate our curing needs. That's some of the examples of how the data is then managed to say, if we're going to grow so much hectares of barley or flu-cured, how much wood do we require to cure that? What type of bands, how many bands do we need? How many trees will we need? And that then translates into a program. That then translates into geotagging those live bands and monitoring their growth, checking if farmers are managing those live bands, because planting is one thing, but managing a tree is another tangent that you need to make sure it's happening. Our survival rates for tree programs are around 85%. They were very bad in the many years before, but when we continue to put management plans around that, we've seen that the live band cycle is working. It starts from training farmers to make their own nursery seeds. If someone does their own nursery seeds, chances are the emotional attachment to that tree will be higher than if you just give them a seedling. So we do train them to do that, and then they, over maybe after 5-6 years, you see a chigafa looking in in picture number 4 on the right corner there. But it's a journey, and you need to walk that journey with growers. You need to show them the benefit. You need to invest. You need to put resources behind it to make sure that it happens. If you leave it to chance, it will not happen. We've planted about 8.2 million trees, and we have 85% survival rate that is audited by external auditors as well. Because it's one thing for a technician to tell you that a grower has done ABCD, and when you go there, you'll find that the trees haven't even been planted. And then we hold them accountable. It affects their objectives. It affects even the grower contracting in the next season. Coming on to a very important aspect of compliance is the chemicals we use on tobacco. There have been claims that some of you know that tobacco is full of chemicals, and you need to show that you're using the right chemicals and you're managing them. So apart from giving growers the right chemicals that we do discuss with the likes of RATE and other research bodies, is that we do go back to collect those empty containers of the CPAs that we use, the chemicals that we use. It's a very key program because a consumer, remember, will ask, how do you dispose of your containers? And if you can't prove how you manage your chemical waste, you will have serious problems with some consumers and some regulatory requirements elsewhere. So we have a program that collects our waste. So we do give growers a pack of chemicals in containers, and when they have used them, we do train them on how to rinse the containers, and then our technicians go and collect them. And then they're disposed in a recycling process in a way that we can then put that due diligence to say, we sent out so many bottles and we collected so many. Where we see gaps, then we make a plan on how to improve. So, just broadly, these are other environmental programs that we do. We have a factory, we have logistics, and we are tracking our carbon emissions. And we have plans to make sure that we reduce our carbon emissions. So you see, Honorable Minister, moving into 2023, we are reducing, with that green line, reducing our carbon emissions on the way our factory emits so that we reduce our impact on the environment. We do have programs in terms of how we use coal. We do have programs on how we deliver our energy in the factory and what other substitutes we can use for more green energy. You mentioned, the Honourable Minister, of the devastation of Cyclone Freddy, and it was really, really terrible on all of us. And we saw a lot of impact. We did map out our growers in the southern region that were impacted, and we've set out programs to do that. JTI, through our foundation, we did contribute to a relief disaster plan of $200,000 this year when Cyclone Freddy hit us. Since 2014 or so, our support to relief and disaster emergencies in Malawi has totaled to about $1.4 million. So again, when you have presence in a country, when you have that direct contractual relationship in a country, when calamity hits you, it's also your calamity. And that's why it is very important when you contract that you develop that relationship. And I believe that's one of the key ways of making sure that corporates feel that they have skin in the situation. And that's why you see that when something like this happens, we as a company do take considerable effort to make sure that we meet the grieving of also those that are impacted, because we are in that problem as well. One key element when we spoke about that in an El Nino year, one of the things that we've done, and I'll not take you through all this data, is that we have put 20 solar-powered water pumps with tanks and reservoir waters so that growers have a fallback position. Is it enough? Maybe not. But it's something that we look into to say maybe others also can emulate and we can work together. I know other companies are putting dams and all sorts of water harvesting programs. We did put these ones mainly to target safe and clean drinking water, but at the same time, in a situation of stress, they can use that water, especially at the nursery level, not for full irrigation of tobacco. So, in conclusion, food for thought. We need to make sure that we are making our supply chain impact assessments. And when I say we, each player in the tobacco industry at their level, we need to be able to demonstrate that we've done supply chain impact assessments. I would encourage Tama that you need to do that. I would encourage government that when you look at the broader value chains, there needs to be to say what is the impact supply chain. And these are some of the pillars that can be looked at based on that example. Because when we want to prove to those regulations in the EU, they would want us to see that we are fulfilling, that we've identified what are the issues and what are the plans that we are putting around that. And traceability to the farmer is a non-negotiable. Climate change, we've spoken a lot about what can be done. Labor rights and farmer economics are the ones that regulators in the EU and in many places they will be looking at. And you need to demonstrate where are you now, where do you need to get to, you need to set targets, and how could we do it together. That's the key questions that I would like us to ponder upon as an industry. In the last slide, we believe a lot of this could hinge on how also we do our policies and our regulations here locally. The prohibition of provision of inputs for complementary crops has an issue on how soils are managed, has an issue on how incomes of growers can be improved, has an impact on how the economy can grow. We need to make sure that these things are managed in our regulations. We need to make sure that the issue of mandatory purchases for non-traceable crops, and I've used that word deliberately, not tobacco, but for non-traceable crops, is not made mandatory. To force someone to buy a crop that they cannot sell a consumer is actually asking them to get out of business. People want to sell products, and the question is, they want to sell to consumers that feel satisfied that this product meets my requirements. And the limitation of economic activity locks a lot of these investments that you've seen. When we are limiting what a player can do, it limits how much they can invest to deliver compliance and to deliver on climate change. With that, I'd like to thank you all for being good listeners, and I would like to thank Tama management and leadership and Honourable Minister for allowing me to be a guest amongst my friends, tobacco growers and farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rimbanika Kwame, the Corporate Affairs and Communications Manager for JTI, and here our guest speaker for the presentation. The Honourable Minister, who is the guest of honor, will take leave of us very soon. A slide slight change on the program as follows. Immediately after, from now, is going to proceed outside to have a brief viewing of the pavilion. Thereafter, there's going to be a group photo. After the group photo, we'll proceed from there. So, Honorable Minister, at your own pleasure, please, let's all rise as the Honorable Minister takes leave of us. We're going outside for a group photo after a brief viewing of the pavilion. Okay. After the group photo, we're going to have tea break, and the following are going to accompany the ITJ president to a place down there. ITJ, the Tama president, the Tama CEO, TC CEO, the guest of honor, Mr. Kakome, Hair and Cotton, Mr. Silindu, TC DTS, Director of Technical Services, and the Allied DTS. They're going to accompany the ITJ president down here for a cup of tea. Thank you so much.
Lately, I've been thinking, I want you to be happier, I want you to be happier. When the morning comes, and we see what we've become. In the cold light of day, we're a flame in the wind, not the fire that we begun. Every argument, every word we can't take back. Cause with all that has happened, I think that we both know the way that the story ends. Then only for a minute I want to change my mind, cause this just don't feel right to me. I wanna raise your spirits, I want to see you smile, but no, that means I'll have to leave. No, that means I'll have to leave. Lately I've been thinking, I want you to be happier, I want you to be happier. When the evening falls and I'm left there with my thoughts, and the image of you being with someone else, well, it's eating me up inside. But we ran our course, we pretended we're okay. Now if we jump together, at least we can swim far away from the wreck we made. Then only for a minute I want to change my mind, cause this just don't feel right to me. I wanna raise your spirits, I want to see you smile, but no, that means I'll have to leave. No, that means I'll have to leave. Lately I've been thinking, I want you to be happier. I want you to be happier. Even though I might not like this, I think that you'll be happier. I want you to be happier. Then only for a minute, I want to change my mind, 'cause this just don't feel right to me. I wanna raise your spirits, I want to see you smile. No, that means I'll have to leave. No, that means I'll have to leave. Lately, I've been thinking, I want you to be happier. I want you to be happier. So I'll
Ine dzina Teresa Jandida ndachokera ku chisomo wagi mu group soka nyakwa soka chipani cha UDF. Project imene yandithandiza chifukwa poyamba ndadziwa kuti wagi ndi chani Young Women Action Group. Choncho kuno kwati Dambe yakhazikitsa magulu awiri amene chisomo komanso chili mbondo. Choncho ndaphunzira kukhala uchita muzandale kupanga ndale mpaka kufikira kuti ndaziphunzira kuchoka kwa wagi mpaka kufika ku chipani kuti ndi mu chipani cha UDF komanso ku chipani cha UDF ataona khama langa komanso kuchita kwanga ndalandira ku udindo wa treasure pa district ya Neno kuti panopa ndine treasure wa Neno district kuchoka ku chipani cha UDF. Panopo ndikuona kuti izi zandithandiza kwambiri kuti panopo lo chipani chandidalira ndine shadow customer 2024 25-24 ndidzapanga ndidzakhala shadow customer ndipo panopo sindikudzideleraso ndipo ndikulimba mtima kuti pa ballot ine ndikayima sindikuopaso panopo fo ndalezi zandiphunzitsa woleke yanditukula ndipo yandiphunzitsa zina zimene ine sindimadziwa fo ndadziwa maboma ang'ono komanso ndadziwa kuti ntchito ya customer ndi ndani komanso ntchito MP imagwira ntchito zanji zonsezo ndaphunzira ndi zimene Yesu kundipanga kuti ineyo ndikukhala oyima njira pandekha nkumadziwa kuti izizi ndili ndikuthekera kupanga izizi ndipo mu 2025 ndikakhala ndi moyo wanga amene ndili ndima pa ballot paper.
Ineyo zinanga ndinodeta ngogodo ndachokera mmuzi mwa akanangwanji group chikalema tiye Dambe. Project imeneyi yandipindulira kwambiri kuchoka chaka cha 2018 kufika lero lino. Chifukwa chonena kuti nthawi yonse yambuyo ikusanabwere project imene ndinalibe busy ndi zandale. Koma project imene itabwera inandipangisa kuti ndikhale ku chipani modi ndiunena panopo ineyo ndine wa UDF secretary wa youth pa district. Ndiponso ndikhumbo langa kuti ndizayimire 2025 kukhala khasala. Komanso china chimene ndapindula kwambiri ndi project imene iyi ndinakwanisa video Lilongwe ku parliament limodzi nda ku Denmark zimene mwina kupanda project imene pamwe nga sizikanatha kuchitika. Komanso project imene yandiphunzitsa kupanga ubale ndi anthu osiyana ndikunena panopo tinali anthu osayankhula timati tikakhala ukafuna yankhula muchowembo lumadzala koma panopo zimeje zinatani kuti zinatha ndazizwa kuti ineyo ndine ndani ndipo taphunzona kuti pali ine panopo ndili nkuthekera kuti kuladira lathu.
Bungwe limene lili landipindulitsa kwambiri chifukwa chonena kuti koyambirira ndinali mtsikana osazindikira china chilichonse koma nditayamba kupezeka mu bungwe limeneli nditaphunzitsidwa za mtsikana azikhala okangalika pandale komanso ngakhale pankhani zina zilizonse zokhuza za chitukuko kudera ineyo zinandipindulira kwambiri oti panopo chifukwa cha zimene zizi nditatha kuchifotokozera kudera adera lija anachilandira ngakhale mafumu oti panopo ndumatha kulandira maudindo osiyana oti panopo ndine chair wa VDC kudera kwa group asoka komanso ndine vice chair wa ADC pati level kusonyeza zonena kuti anachilandira bwino anadziwa kuti mtsikana ndi ofunikira kukhala pa maudindo ena aliwonse pamene mbuyo musizimatheka.
Zina ndine Mphamvu Kalima kuchokera chipani cha DPP pa boma wayo wa Nsanje.
Umbali ya ndalama mmene ndimafotokoza muja kuti timalephera muna kukumana nawo akuluakulu aku chipani chifukwa choti amatha kuna kutiuza kuti munatonalika kumana ndi constituency governor amatha kunena kuti ndiye uli ndi kenakake kuti utiitanisire pa msonkhano mwina umbali ya fanta kapena allowance pomwe iweyo uli mchikhumbukhumbu choti mwina ufuna uzayimire nawo ka kansala wa MP ndio kuona ndi iweyo ndikulephera kwako umangokhala kulephera kukumana nawo adindo ngati amene.
Ine nifasani chapepa ndachokera pa boma wayi wake ndi zaka 21 ndipo ndifuna nditsaime nawo 2025. Ine project yandipindulira kwambiri moti panopa ndikumakwanitsa kupangisa ndekha misonkhano cholinga changa ndifuna nditsaime ukhansala ndimakwanitsa kupangisa ndekha misonkhano ndimakwanitsa kuyankhula pa gulu mopanda mantha to project yandipindulira ndipo yandichotsa mantha.
Dzina langa ni Margaret Joambo, bangula wayi wake ndi zaka 23. Kubwera kwa bungwe imeneli, project imene yandithandiza kwambiri, moti nalo oziyang'anira pansi ngati mtsikana. Chifukwa atsikana mbuyo omwe sitinkaonedwa ngati anthu, maudindo osiyanasiyana tinkangoponderezedwa. Kubwera kwa bungwe limeneli ndithu tinatitsegula maso, moti panopa 2025 ndi mana mpando okhansala. Ndipo pempho kwa atsikana anzanga kuti nawonso ali nako kuthekera kuyima nawo maudindo osiyanasiyana mundale ndipo asaziyang'anire pansi.
Personal growth to business solutions, there is no limit to what you can imagine. It's time to reimagine banking. Centenary Bank, our bank.